Welcome back, everyone, to the Writer's Parachute, where we are guiding writer and author dreams to a perfect landing. Today, we have another very special guest with us. Today, we have Laurie Brock. She is a writer, author, and Episcopal priest. She has 3 books out. We're going to be talking about her newest books, God, Grace, and Horses, and a little bit about some of her other books. But of course, we always start out with a topic of the week for you guys. So let's go ahead and dive into that really quick, and then we'll get back to Laurie. So today we're going to talk about motivation. So motivation. So we're talking about writing. What motivates you to write is one question, but I want you to think more of the motivation behind who you're writing about. Whether you're writing biography, you're writing about some concept or idea, or you're writing fiction, motivation is a very critical point that you need to include in your book. It needs to be part of the arc of the book. It needs to be part of the plot of the book. It needs to be the motivating reason that your character changes through the course of the book, or the idea changes through the course of the book, or the development of the person you're speaking of develops over the course of the book. So there are many things that we can do to communicate motivation in a character or person or topic, but I want you to think about what is motivating you to write about this topic, character, or situation, or item, or thought, and see if you can figure out what would resonate with your audience. Oftentimes, when a hero's journey is typical for a fiction book, we have something that changes at the beginning of the book, and the characters in the book must go through a series of tasks and challenges and journeys to get to the end, to where they resolve whatever the issue is and walk away with some kind of resolution or some kind of change or understanding. So what is motivating those characters? Most of the time, the motivation is to get that answer or whatever it is they want to walk away with at the end. Sometimes it's just to deal with the whatever changed in their life at the beginning of the book. But other times, there's underlying motivation. They want to broaden their life. They want to broaden their knowledge. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. So I want you to think about these motivating factors when you're working on your manuscript. This is something that I would consider maybe in the second or third draft of your book, to look at the motivation and find out if you are including it and if you're including enough of it. This is one of the things that I find that keeps most of your readers glued to the pages and turning them frequently. So I hope that topic is helpful for you this week. Of course, go ahead and stay till the end of the show after we have our interview here with Laurie, because we are going to pull the ripcord on another tip of the week for you too. But of course, we want to get on to our interview and talk with our very special guest, Laurie Brock. She is an author, writer, Episcopal priest. She has 3 books that we're going to be talking about. Laurie Brock is an Episcopal priest currently serving a congregation in Lexington, Kentucky. She previously served for congregations in Alabama and Louisiana. Her experiences led to first starting a blog, ReverendLaurieBrock.com, then an offer to write the book, Where God Hides Holiness. After moving to Lexington, she discovered horses and has been writing and showing American saddlebreds since 2011. Laurie Brock is also an attorney and a volunteer for the crisis chaplain with the Lexington Police Department. Welcome to the Writer's Parachute. Laurie, how are you today?
Thank you. I'm good. I'm glad to be here.
We are very excited to have you. And I just have to start this off. It's like I'm having to rein in my excitement. I really love this book, God, Grace, and Horses. I was not quite sure what to expect when I got the book, and had several interruptions come up when I was starting to read it. But once I did start reading this book, a couple of pages in, I was hooked. I was wanting to turn those pages and keep going. Now, you yourself have a very fascinating journey, and it's not only as an author and writer, but just as a person. So can you tell us how you merged these 3 loves of God, Grace, and Horses into one amazing life and now a book?
There are days I don't know that I myself even know that. I think that how they merged was I was very much willing to make mistakes. I was thinking the other day when I was thinking about this interview, if you had said to me 20 years ago, when I was still a very baby priest, oh, this is where your life will be in 20 years. There's no way I could not have comprehended it. And it was not because things were easy. And it was not because I didn't go through a great deal of hardship. Where God hides holiness came out of the product of working in a church where I was sexually harassed and bullied by a fellow priest. And I remember thinking, I will not survive this. And so I think that process of being allowed to be broken, and because life does break us and pulls us apart, and other people make bad choices that hurt us. And I think part of that was I do want to say I had an amazing and remarkable therapist who really helped me understand the value of brokenness, but also the witness of that life is not about perfection. It is about being perfectly messy and being where you are in the moment. And so some of that, my journey, I think, has been just a grace-filled movement through the things that really are wonderful and the things that are just really hard. And the fact that I rediscovered horses in Lexington, and I tell people, I wish that was really one of those great stories that could be in a movie. I literally had been here for a year. I quickly could see myself becoming one of those clergy people who never did anything but the church. And like, that was not what I wanted to be. I don't think it is a mentally or spiritually healthy thing for any clergy person to do that. And I got a Groupon for riding saddlebreds. I didn't know what saddlebreds were. And this was back when Groupon was still cool. Like, you could do experiences, and that's what I did. So I got a Groupon, and I'd never seen a cutback saddle in my life. I'd never seen a saddlebred, and I started to ride, and I really enjoyed it. And then I bought my own horse. And then probably, I think 4 months after I bought her, Nina got kicked by a horse, and I went into a fence, and I broke 5 ribs and punctured a lung. So I was like, I always say, the journey is not the perfection. The journey is just the reality and the messiness of it all. And just remembering that we just keep going, and that all that happens to us, certainly as humans, but certainly as writers, gives us things to share our story, because the world is so filled with people who need to hear, I think, vulnerability and honesty about life. And that's what resonates in so many writings and podcasts, I think.
Oh, I agree with you. I love that you have somewhere deep in the book this absolute perfect definition of perfectionism. I've seen this described many times, and you say that perfectionism is the sin of thinking we are above mistakes so that we have to figure out what went wrong. And I agree with you. It's like we get so caught up into being perfect that we don't allow for mistakes. We don't expect mistakes. And quite frankly, we don't learn anything from the mistakes because we're always looking for a culprit.
Yeah, somebody is to blame. And that is not to say, and certainly that was some of the work that there's a thread that runs through there, I think, because again, of the great guidance I had in the situation that produced Where God Hides Holiness. There is a difference between looking for a culprit and knowing when somebody made choices that were deeply damaging and hurtful, and then empowering yourself to say, and what now?
Exactly.
And I think that perfectionism, either we have to find the villain, or we completely fall into the role of, and I have no power in that, because perfectionism is, and it's just, I think as writers, perfectionism, it's a deadly sin on several levels, but certainly we're never going to write the perfect sentence. We're just not.
No, and I like to think of, I never learn anything from being perfect. So perfection means that I miss an important lesson that I need in my life. So I try not to think too much about being perfect, but of course we all fail.
Yeah.
Do you try to recognize when I'm trying to be perfect that I'm trying to avoid a lesson that I might really need? You've written 3 books. It's Where God Hides Holiness, also Horses Speak to God, and then of course your newest book, God, Grace, and Horses. So I want to know what this inspiration for this third book was and what makes it different from the other two.
It was not the book that it came to be. The proposal that I actually sold to Paraclete was actually a book about travel and pilgrimages. And I signed contracts early March of 2020 before the world shut down. And in that space, I just thought, how do I even begin to write a book about movement and travel? And there was a part of horses in there. So it wasn't like I was totally away from that. When we might not ever be able to travel again, because I think we forget, like in that time, we just had no idea what the world was going to look like. And my editor, after sort of things started to shut down, said, we like the book, but here's my advice. Start your first chapter with horses. And I said, okay. I wrote the first, and I was like, yay, that's, and then I tried to write the second chapter on whatever and I came back and wrote another chapter on horses, and then and I finally just realized, I just need to write this book about horses. And I think that part of me was fighting against that because the proverbial one-trick pony. And I thought, but you know what? That pony's got a good trick. And the thing that I find about horses is that they continually teach me. I mean, I didn't get a certificate that says, okay, now I know everything there is about spirituality and horses. So they continue to teach me. And part of the book too was a real invitation, because I think that I would say that grace is one of those words that we can't really define, but we know it when we see it. And I always say grace is yoga pants. Grace fits us when we when we eat too much. Grace is comfortable. It holds us together. It's the thing we can put on and feel good about ourselves and go outside in public. And I think what I realized as I was writing these chapters, I was discovering the wisdom of those tiny things that horses do every day, that when I encounter them, that help me go out into the world in public. Because again,
So I'm writing this book in the middle of the pandemic, which the world is turned upside down. And there was that very interesting balance of how much of that do I allow in the actual text and how much do I just write around. And for me, it was literally the barn and horses that were helping me find my way through as a human being in the middle of just all of the chaos of the pandemic. So the motivation became, in a way, I feel like in some ways, the book is a very well edited diary of mine during the pandemic, and also something that I hope can speak beyond just that time that happened in 2020 that we're still dealing with, obviously, with COVID, but also just, I think that it's again that reminder of perfection. I think would have wanted to stay with that original proposal, and Grace said, follow this road. This is the road we're going to follow and do this.
And I did love that about the book, because it not only did stop and pause for that moment in time in history, but it also talked about us being universal and how this translates to so many things in our life that we're struggling with. But the difference being that this was in our face. This was like the big stop sign for everybody. It's okay. Whatever you had planned is now going to stop, and you're going to have to look at all of the things that you've been avoiding. So I did love that about the book. I honestly found so many moments in this book that spoke to me. Especially, I want to talk first about chapter 6 in forward. I love this chapter. And you're quoting in there saying, we forget that we have blind spots with what's behind us, and constantly wanting to move forward isn't always the safest option. Now, I know the story behind why you're saying that, but I really want you to share with us, because I think this chapter it made me laugh. It made me want to cry, but it really talked to the part of me that's always too busy.
I'm gonna guess that part of that is that my Aunt Tote, my great Aunt Tote, she is a great aunt of mine and lived her life on her terms in many ways, which for her really meant she never married, which, now is not as scandalous, but in her lifetime, that was a really significant, and was a career woman, very high up in in what eventually becomes AT&T with all the Bell mergers. But my Aunt Tote could not drive a car in reverse. And that is a family legend. She could drive in forward all day long, but she could not drive in reverse. And when my grandmother was a young woman, my Aunt Tote decided to take all of her nieces because she thought they should see the country all the way to California. And she did it in forward. She would, and my grandmother would tell the story about how they stayed a lot at friends that she had through the telephone company. But at every evening, they had to take a tablespoon of milk of magnesia. I don't even know why, and I don't ever want to really know why. But where, and I've always had that story, and it's why one of the things that I think is so important in our world, especially in a culture, because I do think this about our U.S. culture that just idolizes youth. I am so thankful that I had a family that told the stories, because my Aunt Tote died before I was ever born, but her sisters were. But I remembered the story. I was in California in February of 2020 and we were in the northern part of California and went to a monastery, and there was a quote there by a Spanish monastic, and I paraphrase, but it's like, always keep moving forward. And I was like, oh, I should get that magnet for Aunt Tote, which I did. And then when I thought about the logic of it, because that is the world we live in, keep moving forward, chug on, keep going. And I realized, like, that's not like really helpful advice. There are times that we do need to stop for so many reasons. And it was interesting because that chapter, I think, was the one that was the hardest to write, because that, what was the original draft and then what becomes this chapter, really had to go through a lot of stops and starts and putting it down and coming back to it, until I finally realized, like, it wasn't that my Aunt Tote believed in never stopping. She just didn't have time to ever learn how to drive a car in reverse or what, for whatever reason. But she did take time to stop. And the broadness of the story is a horse can't back up forever. They want to stop and turn around and look at what they see, because if they back up too much, they'll just flip over, and that hurts the horse and hurts the rider. But there was a value in, it's okay to stop, and it's okay to turn around and look. Now, my tendency is I want to turn around and look at everything. Like, if I examine everything long enough, it's all going to make sense. And so it is just a reminder of that kind of balance that my horse Nina, that I will watch. If she sees something that intrigues her, she might look over her shoulder, but she wants to look at it, she will actually turn around and look at it. So I think there was just a real value. And again, that as I've looked at that chapter even more, I realized in the world with COVID, how many people will say, oh, I want to go back to whatever. And we're not going to do that. We cannot undo the past 2 years. We cannot undo the massive grief that sits on all of us, of millions of deaths, of the world, the safety that we no longer feel like we have. Because I think nobody really thought a pandemic was going to, I did not have that on my bingo card. So I think the idea of recognizing it's okay to stop and mourn or examine or look or do whatever, and then go forward where we need to go forward. But it's also okay to reflect. But Alex said that was a chapter that I felt like took the most nuancing, because so much of this book came literally sentence by sentence. It was not one of those where I was like, oh, I can write for an hour and a half at a time. There were some chapters that were, oh, we're going to do it this way.
I know for me, it's like, I know all of those lessons, those talking points are in there. For me, it was about, there's a time for looking backwards and there's a time for reflection. Life is what's in front of you. It isn't what's behind you. You've already lived that life. And that was the biggest lesson for me is, yeah, I can reflect and everything like that, but I can't get stuck in the past, because then that means I'm giving away the future.
And what's in front of us is certainly shaped by by the path we've walked, but it's not defined by that. I think that it's open in a different way.
Which I love. I'm all about going and trying and doing new things. It really did speak to me. And then there was another chapter that really resonated with me, and that was chapter 13, Broken. Now, Broken was a hard chapter to read mostly because I felt like I was holding a mirror up in front of my face. And I think you talk about that in the book, about how we're all broken. And I want to know why acceptance of our brokenness is important.
Quoting the great Leonard Cohen, the broken places are how the light shines through. We live in a culture that lauds perfectionism. And I think brokenness doesn't damage us. It gives us depth. The people that I know who are the most deeply present, particularly in tragic situations or hardships, are those people who have been broken and lived into that brokenness and healed. And I always say that there's brokenness in and of itself is not the goal. It's that in our brokenness, we find the beauty of it all. It's the pieces of the shards of our souls that, for me, as a person who is religious, that God can refashion into this beautiful new mosaic. The pot's not finished. It's like, oh, this can just get repurposed into this gorgeous mosaic. But I think that we have to admit our brokenness, and we just don't live in a culture that does that. We live in a culture that, again, oh, this happened, but now I'm over it. And I've learned all these great things. And I think what I love about the space of being broken is that it is a constant learn. There are things that go revisit from 20 years ago that I'm like, oh, wait, I've got this. I didn't ever think of it that way. So it really is the jewels that you get. Lotuses grow in the mud kind of thing. And the people that frighten me most in ministry, quite honestly, are the people who do not talk about their brokenness or act as if nothing's wrong. When I hear people say, that horrible thing happened in my life, but I've processed it and I'm done. Like, you do not get to play in my sandbox.
And I get that. And I think that we're so busy proving to the world that we're fine. And we all do it. It's like somebody will go, how are you today? And you're like, I'm fine.
I'm fine. Yeah.
And we just gloss over. It's something we feel like we have to hide. And I really love this quote that you have in there that says, brokenness happens because life happens.
Life happens.
It's not absolutely true. There are always going to be things that happen in your life, big and small, that break you.
And I would say some brokenness happens because of choices we make. And some brokenness happens because of choices other people's make. And some of it happens because of a combination of those things. So life does this. I have a friend of mine who is an archaeologist, and she says that it gave her a whole new understanding of the value of broken pieces, because she goes, that's what we have from past. We don't have, she says, latrines are her big specialty. But she says, like in the days before garbage collection, people would just throw broken pieces of pottery in latrines. Houses burned and people moved, but what do they have? The evidence of human existence were the broken pieces that were thrown in the latrine. And I thought, if that is not the gospel, I don't know what is. Like, the broken pieces are not the things in the museums. The real life, or the stuff that people threw away that we're still finding 200, 500, 1,000 years from now, because there's value in what's broken. And I think when we can see that in ourselves, it allows us to create space for people who are broken as well to be vulnerable and honest and feel safe in that space. And whether that's as a friend or a clergy person or a writer, I mean, that it invites people to feel safe in the space of, oh, I'm going to read something that's hard, and I feel safe doing that.
And like I said, it was hard to read because I did feel like there was a mirror in front of me. It felt like I was trying to talk to myself, but I did appreciate that. So I do have to say, as much as I loved all of this book, the most favorite chapter for me was The Color Purple. It's chapter 16. And it was a hard pick for me, but I think the reason is because that particular chapter talked to the lost child in myself, and I think the lost child in all of it. Can you please summarize that story? Because I don't think I could do it justice.
First of all, that was the one chapter I was like, I can't name this chapter after that amazing book. I thought, I'm going to trust my editor to say, you are an idiot. But She didn't, so I'm going to guess it was okay. I think so. It starts out that I was in preschool, and it is such a clear memory that I have of being in preschool, and I have a purple crayon and I'm coloring the face of a person purple. And the preschool teacher comes to tell me, Laurie, better than that. People's faces aren't purple. And that is still I feel that memory in my bones. And I didn't color people's faces purple for a long time, metaphorically and literally. And when I was in college, I had to you had to have a PE credit at the university. And I took Western horsemanship, and I hadn't really ridden horses a lot, but it was, this works in my schedule and I'm going to do this. And I was like super competitive, like the degrees, and it's ridiculous. The world, like, the more merit I have, the better, all that good stuff. But I went to learn an Apple was the horse I rode. And I remember realizing like, it's a pass-fail class. So I was kind of like, well, of course I'm going to pass. But it was the time I remember being present and not trying to accomplish something, which was not my experience at all at that point in my life. I was like, I have to be with this horse. And I can't just suddenly know how to ride Western. I have to actually work at this. But the barn where it was at the university was open, and I had riding late afternoon, early evening. And so as the season went on, you could watch the sunset. And I can remember, again, like this memory of standing there in her stall with her, watching the purple sunset, and kind of just having a tiny taste of what the world might be like if I quit trying to accomplish something and I just colored people's faces purple. And part of what was important for me to put this chapter in there is a reminder that we don't have to get it all on the first trip. I think we live again in a culture that sort of fear of missing out, like, you better do it because it's not going to come around again. I firmly believe that if there's something that we are meant to have in our lives, it will show up as many times as it takes us to get it. I did not, after that experience, suddenly become the person that colored people's faces purple. I didn't even ride horses again after that for many years. And yet, when it finally came around when horses finally came around, and when God handed me the metaphorical purple crayon for the 1,000th time, because I know it wasn't just this time, I got it. And I still really struggle with that, much less, but I just remember thinking, it's such an important thing to remember. If we miss it the first time around, if it's something that we're supposed to get, it's going to come back again. We don't need to lament that we missed it. We just weren't ready for it at that time. So and long story short, I actually have 2 rooms in my house painted purple one is the room where I write in and my prayer room. And the other is currently being used as the foster kitten room. So I have 2 purple rooms in my house.
I know it spoke to me in a slightly different way. I did get what you were getting at. For me, it was more about being so rigid with yourself, about listening to all of the criticism and the guidelines. And sometimes you have to do what's right for you. And if that means that you color faces purple, then color faces purple and be happy with that. I did like that because it gave that part of me as a child that was so afraid to misbehave, that moment to just go, it was okay that you didn't really want to do that. It was just needed to hear that.
And I love that one of the things I love about writing is to hear people say, this is what I heard. Because once I put something in print out there, it's still my story, but I also open it up to be other people's stories. And I love to hear when people say, let me tell you what I resonated with in this chapter, because it's going to be different from you're not living my life. But another thing I remember is how careful we should all be before we tell somebody not to do something. Clearly, obviously, yes, tell people don't drink and drive or eat poison. If somebody wants to wear the clothes that they want to wear, you always say, like, how's that bothering me? And so I just think that's another reminder. I doubt that preschool teacher ever thought twice about that, but it had a profound impact on me for a long time in my life.
Yes, yes. And it does. That's the thing. People don't know that their innocent remarks strike a dagger in the heart of a child or another person because of their experiences and what is in their heart and in their mind at that moment. That for you were just trying to express creativity, and for me, I was just heartbroken for you, going, no. It's like
I had a woman email me who's a preschool teacher, and she was just a horror. She like, I need to apologize on behalf of your, and I just thought, but I also think part of that too is creativity is not measurable. Obviously, there are people like Picasso, but at the end of the day, if it is an expression of life for you that you think is beautiful, that is enough. And I always think any expression of creativity it should be welcomed and affirmed, certainly in children, and it's also why I think that creative writing classes and art and music and all those classes should be as important in our school system as the reading and writing and arithmetic, that the 3 are, so to speak. But I just think that creativity, children are by nature beautifully creative.
And they've proven nowadays that the creativity actually helps with those 3 R's.
Insight, yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I love this book. And I could go on and talk about the different chapters of this book, but I'm not going to. I'm going to encourage our listeners to go out and buy their own copy. I guarantee you are going to find something, and probably several somethings within this book, God, Grace, and Horses, that is going to speak to you. So now I'm going to go ahead and shift gears just a little bit, and we're going to talk about why you're here on the Writer's Parachute. As we know, all writers and authors run into challenges and obstacles when writing their book, and you did clearly outline some of them that you ran into with the COVID. But we want to know what challenges that you've had and what did you learn from it?
So I missed the last part of that question.
I was asking what challenges that you've had on your journey and what did you learn from them?
Okay. A lot. Part of the challenges, and I think so many writers have this, is finding your voice. What is your voice, and not copying another writer's voice. And I wish there was an easy process for that other than just writing, but that is the process, is that you just write and you write. And then you kind of like, oh, wait, this sounds. One of the great compliments I had is one of my colleagues, clergy colleagues that I'm acquainted with, but not really close friends with, but we know each other through the church. When he read Horses Speak of God, said, I could hear your accent through the whole thing. And I thought it was hilarious. I was like, oh, that's the voice. So I think that finding voice, and it's one of those things about, I am a fan of one of the things we've all heard is write what you know. Write what I am a fan of write what you don't know. I think that it is okay to venture off into places that you're not really sure about. I think for me, Horses Speak of God was a book that I didn't really feel comfortable writing because I was like, I had only really ridden horses at that time for about 4 or 5 years. And so I was like, oh, I don't know. There are people who've forgotten more than I know about horses. And yet I just wrote, but I'm writing from that place and then discovering what that looks like for me. And it was the same in God, Grace, and Horses as well, to let the writing surprise you. And that feels uncomfortable. And I promise you do a lot of backspacing and cutting out paragraphs because you end up writing stuff. But I think for me, that just following the trail of what that looks like. And so I've taught some writers workshops on writing what you don't know, because I think if you write what you can, I don't know a lot. Like, I think be surprised, but you write. And the other thing that I wish that I had known and that I've learned is write from your broken places that have healed. Because a lot of times, especially as women, I think we're encouraged to bleed on the page a little more. And I think that that's okay to do, but no, that might not be something that needs to be published yet. Like, just save it. And there's parts of God, Grace, and Horses that when I have to do readings, I will not read them out loud because I can't get through it without my voice cracking. that's about as deeply personal as I want to get. I've read memoirs by people and books that I was like, oh, I wanted you to save this for another year before you publish this kind of thing. And I wonder if, but I think that there's value in writing from our brokenness, but feeling safe about offering that brokenness to others. Because once we put it out there, it's out there, and people are going to take it the way they take it and find what they need to find in it. And that's a hard line to walk, because we do need vulnerability in writing. We do need messiness. We do need that. And we also need to know as writers, because we are engaged in such a vulnerable act anyway. Like here, I have worked for a year on this book, and now you get to read it and put an Amazon review on there. I really want people to feel safe with what they put out there, or as safe as they need to feel. And so those would probably be the big three. And I still live with those daily, of sitting in those spaces as well.
And that's great advice. I always talk about it in the terms of 3 P's of writing. You have to have patience, which means you have to wait till the end of the journey to tell the journey, because of you need the passion that comes with discovering something new, but you need the perspective of understanding what you just learned.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes as writers, when we're picking a topic, we have to apply those 3 P's. Am I patient with what I'm writing about? Do I know enough? Do I have enough perspective? And mostly, do I have the passion to see it through? And this is where I think most people find their voice. Is you don't have to be an expert to write about something. You just have to be honest, but honest to the point that it's helpful.
Because let's be honest, if I'm going to read an expertise book on there, it's not going to be a memoir or fiction. Like, I'm going to go find something from a technical manual. If I read somebody's story, I'm assuming that they're probably learning on the fly in some ways too.
Yes, absolutely. That is exactly what happens a lot of times. We talk a little bit about your book. So I want to know what one message you hope readers would get from your book or book.
I hope that the message they get, and a little convoluted, but we are never too old to find ourselves. I came back to riding horses when I was over 40. And I can't imagine my life without them now. And I just think so much of this wisdom came at the right time, because had I been in my 20s, it would have been lost on me. But I think that remember that a life lived in the decades is a seasoned life with stories to tell. And this happens to be my story right now of horses. We were talking about editors. My editor was very good at making sure that I was very clear that, so if you don't know anything about horses, you're good. You can read this. If you have a tangential relationship with God or spirituality, you're good, because even though I come from a Christian point of view, God is so much bigger than that. But I just think that life is really a journey of discovery. And I hope I never get to a point where I think I know it all. I was at that when I was 16. I'm not at that now.
Right. No, I remember that. I remember when I went through it. I remember when my daughters went through it. I remember when my granddaughters went through it. So yes, we all hit that age as teenagers going, yes, we've learned it all. We know it all.
We know it all. Yes.
So I want to know what 3 things about writing in general or publishing that you wish somebody had told you, or you wish you knew before you went on the journey.
Oh, I have a list of the top 3. I would say this: editors are your friends. And I think that no matter how good you are as a writer, an editor can step back from your work and help you. Like, they're not grading you. You're not going to get, well, you do sometimes. It's not going to be like, this is terrible, but editors are your friends. And I think that was part of the process, because I had never written, like, when I fell very backwards into my first book. and didn't know. I was really lucky to have a wonderful editor who explained a lot to me. So I would say editors are your friends. Have a community of writers that you trust to ask questions for. Again, I kind of fell backwards into that just because I had, through the church, I knew people who had written books and they said, oh, and they were really helpful because I have a law degree. I was a practicing lawyer before I was a priest. Publishing contracts are a nightmare. That is a fair thing to ask people. And this is one of the things I love to say, particularly to women. Be honest, talk about what you're making. Don't let new writers sign a contract for, oh, I get 3% royalties. No, don't let them do that. Be honest about those because there's not really a manual out there. There might be. So I think that wonderful things like podcasts like this sort of help people, but get a community of published writers who, whether it's on Facebook or Zoom or in person, that you can be honest with about the mechanics of writing and what a critique group, whatever, but also you can be like, this is what my new contract says. What do you think? So I think that, and I wish I knew that. And I actually knew this before I ever wrote a book, but I didn't really know it, if that makes sense. So my writing journey began when I was an attorney in Mobile, Alabama. And I'm going to give a shout out again. You will not finish where you start. So and this is the story behind that statement. I had this desire to write. I've always written. I have journals from when I was 5 years old. They should be burned when I die, but because I write in there about like my concerns about being too old to get the Happy Meal prize, which is a big deal when you're 7. But so I wanted to write. And one of the writers that I knew said, you need to come to the meeting of the Romance Writers of America. And so I went and I was a member of that. And I never need to be allowed anywhere near a fiction book ever to write one. I'm not a fiction writer. I'm an essayist. I have good friends who are fiction writers, and I'm in awe of what they do because I just couldn't do that. But it was so helpful to hear them talk about the craft of writing, because the craft of writing, whether it's nonfiction, fiction, poetry, it's still writing and you have something on. But one of the agents told me, or told a group that we were in, and it's about like writers. She said, a fiction writer can be a complete jerk, and that doesn't matter. A nonfiction writer sells their books. And so if you write nonfiction, you are going to have to do things like this, but to put yourself out there, to lead writing workshops, to speak. And that's a lot of work. Because I have to say, most writers, I think, honestly, are misanthropes. Like we like our alone time. That's part of this. If you want to be, now again, fiction writing, apparently you can be a jerk about, but nonfiction writing, if you're going to do that, even though I knew it, it wasn't until really Horses Speak of God that I realized, oh, like I was having phone. Can you come do this? Can you come speak at our ladies club? Zoom has been wonderful because I can actually do things like that without having to fly and with the expense of that. But that's an important thing. And again, most of us don't come into the world knowing how to do public speaking. Now, because I'm a priest and I'm in front of people and I'm preaching all the time, that was not a big deal for me. And I just think that's an aspect of writing that's not in front of your computer. But if you are going to talk about your book or go out, then call up a colleague who is in public speaking or whatever to get some tips about what do I need to do? Because you have to market your book, and that is a way that you do it. So those are the 3 things that I would say that I learned on the fly.
Those are great things. And just to tell you, as fiction writers, we do still have to sell our books. I don't know too many fiction writers that get away with being jerked, maybe some of the best-selling ones or something like that.
Yeah, now, to be clear, this was like 30 years ago. So yeah. I'm sure the world has changed. But again, we write a book and I'm done, and you're not.
Starting. You're just starting, which is, it's always a wake-up call for most people. I have to tell you that you're a very inspiring person. I really loved your book. And you're also a very inspiring author. But I want to know who inspires you.
Oh, that's a long list. I will say that I will put it in sort of 2 groups of people. I am inspired every day by many of the people that I have the privilege of serving as a priest here, who literally live out with every moment of their life the Mother Teresa quote about doing small things with great love. To know that there are people who find ministry in writing notes to our members who can't leave their home because of illness or infirmity. And I'm always inspired by the tiny things that people do to make the world just that much better of a place. And I am also constantly inspired by, and they get press in the book, Wingswept Farm, where I ride, and my friends, my family, my barn family there. These are people that I get to be very real with because I'm not the priest there, even though they all know that's what I do. And there is something that is such a gift about just being with people who know me and see me as sometimes messy. And they have seen me get off a horse so mad that I could just spit fire because the horse was in a bad mood and I was too. And I vow I'm never riding again. And they all know I am. But then, and just to know, I was thinking the other day, like when we show, we have to be very clean. And I'm always managing to get, like Stephanie, my trainer's always, don't move. Your job is to stay clean. Because Anita, who's one of the women out there that I ride with, always polishes my boots once I'm on the horse. And what a gift that is to have people who take care of that. So the people who inspire me are the people who remember. It's not the headlines that change the world. It's the tiny little acts that just let people know they matter.
And that is amazing and very inspiring in of itself. So one last question for you. What is next for you? What's on the horizon?
What is next is I have finally finished. I had several essays that are going in different devotionals. But I am getting together. In fact, I was like having those kind of anxiety dreams last night about, do I have the Zoom link for this? And did I get the time? But I'm working on another book, and it is really around, the working title is Monastery of the Horse. And it is really about the monastic practices that horses embody and have taught me. And silence, being present, the ora and labora, work and pray kind of thing. So working on that project, and I've got some book signings and presentations coming up in Berea, Kentucky, and in Knoxville, Tennessee in the next couple of months. And I feel like I write every day. And I tell people it's not pretty. Somebody says, "Oh, you write every day?" I say, "Oh, let me clarify. It's not publishable stuff every day." And so I'm looking forward, hopefully, with another book through Paraclete, and just to keep writing. I never would have thought that I would have. When I hear you say you have 3 books, I'm like, when did that happen? So there is just something beautiful about putting words into the world and hearing that they resonate with people, and knowing that it's not just the words, that something about love gets in between them and finds people where they are.
And that is so very true. And your books are beautiful. And we definitely going to want to have you come back once you have this new book out. So where can the listeners find your books?
So I'll hold them up. Both Horses Speak of God and God, Grace, and Horses are available Amazon, local bookstores. I love to support local bookstores, so please, as you can. But Paraclete Press is my publisher. So you can actually go to their website and order it. And if you give them your email and subscribe to their newsletters, which they have some wonderful books, you get a 30% off coupon there. I have to say, I don't know that Where God Hides Holiness is still in print. I think it's on Amazon, though, on a digital book. So I think that it may be. I have to say, it's one of those, and not that it's the redheaded stepchild of the book. It's just the one that I haven't done the tour for. And I also ask, if people like books, mine, otherwise, please go to Amazon and leave a review, even if you hit just 4 stars. Like, you don't have to say words, because there are algorithms in Amazon that the number of reviews, it helps the book, gives you more press time. And especially for independent writers and small press writers, which Paraclete is a really wonderful publisher, but they're not Random House. So I really implore readers to go on, leave reviews of the books you love, because I know we talked about this earlier. As writers, we really don't get a lot of feedback. People get your books, and I think that we think, oh, they get all these letters. There were times when I was trying to write God, Grace, and Horses, that the only thing that kept me writing was that I would get a letter from, I have a letter in here from a monk who lives who's at a monastery, I think in Minnesota. And he says, we have your book in our monastery and it sells out every month to every pilgrim that comes. And I was just blown away by that. And so please I would say life is short. Tell people that you love them. Tell writers that their stuff matters to you and how it does. And then leave reviews for art, because it really is helpful. And we all need some blue ribbons every now and then.
Yes, we do. And that is such a wonderful reminder to all readers that, yeah, it's like authors depend on those reviews to get them elevated and to move them up in the ranks of what is being recommended to readers on a regular basis. So that's always helpful. I do appreciate you mentioning that. So you're also active on a few of the social media platforms. Can you let us know which ones those are?
I am. So I'm on Facebook under Rev Laurie Brock. So I think it's all one word, REV, and that's on Facebook. On Instagram, it's Rev Laurie and Lex. And then on Twitter, it's also Rev Laurie and Lex. And I do still have a blog, but it is astonishing how much time it takes to do blog posts. So if you do go to the blog, and that's revlauriebrock.com, that's for better or for worse, what it's become now is where I make sure that people know like upcoming events that are, but that's also on the Facebook page as well. And I think social media is a great way to keep in touch with people and see people's wonderful. I post a lot about horses, and yeah, so there's a lot of pretty horse pictures on mine.
That's always entertaining. Sometimes when I have bad days, I just go look at pictures of cats. It makes me.
I'm with you. Any pets are wonderful things to remind us that the world is going to be okay.
And just a reminder to our listeners, we will of course have all the links to Laurie's 3 books. We'll have a link to her blog and website, as well as all of her social media platforms for you in the show notes. So just one last thing. Is there any upcoming events? You mentioned you had a couple coming up. So can you share those with us?
I could if I had my calendar with me, but since I had to shift places quickly because of the internet. But in October, I'm going to guess this, but Berea, Kentucky, which is an amazing town if you've never been, and it's a pretty accessible town. I believe it's on October 14th or 15th, but double check. But there's an independent bookseller called the Taleless, Talelles dog. And I'll be doing a signing there, but it's an independent bookstore in a great crafty town. And then I believe that November 10th is the date. And again, this will all be on my face. I will be at the Church of the Ascension in Knoxville, Tennessee, for discussing God, Grace, and Horses with the Bishop of East Tennessee, Brian Cole. And that is free and open to the public. And I will be there, and I will have books to sell. And they also have several awesome bookstores in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I'm preaching here every Sunday. So if you're ever in Lexington, stop by St. Michael's.
All right. We so appreciate that. And I will get the full information from Laurie before she goes today. And we will put that in the show notes for you for her 2 book signings that are coming up. If you're in the Knoxville area, you can go by and see her, or you're just outside of Louisville. Is that correct?
Lexington is west, and Berea is about 30 miles south of Lexington. So it's a great college town, but not too far from the Tennessee line, Alabama.
Okay, great. We'll get you that information. Was there anything else you want to include before we go pull the ripcord on our tip of the week?
I thank you for letting me be part of this. And thank you. I was thinking to myself as we're talking, I was like, I wish I had this podcast 30 years ago when I started writing.
I'll have to tell you, it took me 30 years to gain all of this knowledge and help and confidence that I have now to do this. So I appreciate that. And you guys make it better and easy for me by coming on here and talking about your journey and the things that you struggle with, so that we can kind of let the rest of the world, the authors and writers out there that feel alone, know that they aren't alone, that we all, even though it seems like we're sailing by, we all struggle with.
Nobody's sailing. I was like, I ran across a quote that said, don't compare your backstage to somebody else's opening night. And when you look at books on the shelf, that's our opening night. But there's a lot of backstage stuff that's just not suitable for public consumption.
Yes, exactly. We're hiding it all. But let's go ahead and pull the report on the tip of the week. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about what Laurie brought up, where she was talking about writing what you know and finding your voice. So we talked a little bit about the writing what you know and the 3 P's that I like to bring up about patience, passion, and perspective. So those are always very helpful to apply when you're trying to figure out what you should work on and what you should write on. And I think the first one you need to think about is, what are you passionate about? Because if you're not passionate about it, there's nothing that is going to carry you through to the end of that book or that project or that manuscript. There's nothing that will carry you through on the hard days when it becomes difficult to drag one word at a time after the other. So you have to have that passion first. And then the second one is have the patience to look at it critically and decide how you want to approach that, which brings in the third one, which is perspective. What perspective do you want to present? There are 101 ways to come at any topic. They're like all the roads leading to Rome. It doesn't matter which road you take if your destination is Rome, but there are journeys along the way. So what is your journey going to teach new? What is the journey going to look at differently? So this is where you're talking about that perspective, about how you're going to present that information, whether it's in a fictional format, a nonfiction format, or something in between, such as a memoir. You want to think about how you're going to take your reader with you on that journey. So this is all about finding your voice. And the last thing I'm going to say about finding your voice and writing what you know or what you don't know, as Laurie put up, is that we all have something unique to say. The fact that we've made it this far, that we've survived 100% of the catastrophes that we've had in our life, and we're still here to talk about it, is interesting and intriguing to others. So finding your voice is about being yourself. It's about presenting the information that you want into your writing. And the one thing that I try to remind people is there's always somebody out there desperately needing to hear the way you present that material. And don't worry so much about how everybody else has done it. Even if it's been written about 1,000 times, every time you write about it is going to be new and different, even just for yourself. You could sit here and write about the same topic Laurie's talked about. She's written about God and horses in almost every single one of her books, but they're all uniquely different. And because she was in a uniquely different space in her life when she was writing about it. So again, trust yourself, apply the 3 Ps, and go out there and write a great book. That's all we need. All right. I hope you enjoyed this week on the Writer's Parachute. Of course, we want you to go and hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and like this show and hit the bell so you get a reminder every time we have a new episode every Wednesday. We would also like for you to go follow us on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and now on TikTok at Writer Parachute. That's Writer Parachute with no S. We hope that you had an amazing time. Of course, we want to thank Laurie as our guest this week, and we hope to have her back soon. Thank you, Laurie. And of course, we hope that all of your writing and your other dreams land well. Until next time, bye.
Bye. Thank you.